What if I told you that one of the most powerful empires in the 20th century collapsed without a single shot being fired? Indeed, the fall of the Soviet Union was an intricate dance of dominoes, a cascade of events that led to its dissolution on December 26, 1991. This was no simple feat. The Soviet economy was grappling with severe challenges, struggling with inefficiency and stagnation. Attempted reforms like perestroika aimed to introduce market elements but only led to increased economic chaos. Political reforms, too, played their part. Gorbachev's glasnost inadvertently fanned the flames of nationalist movements, leading to demands for independence among the various Soviet republics. Changes in the Eastern Bloc, the arms race with the United States, and a failed coup attempt all contributed to the unraveling tapestry of the Soviet Union. This was not a sudden overnight event, but a culmination of various factors, each playing a pivotal role in the Soviet Union's downfall. The seeds of the Soviet Union's fall were sown in its very economic structure. Now, this may seem like a bold statement, but let's dive into the details to see why this is so. The Soviet economy by the 1980s was a picture of inefficiency and stagnation. It was characterized by a disproportionate focus on heavy industry. This meant that while factories churned out tanks and tractors, the production of consumer goods was woefully inadequate. This imbalance led to severe shortages and a poor quality of life for the average Soviet citizen. In an attempt to fix this, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev launched a series of economic reforms, the most famous of which was perestroika. Now, perestroika, which translates to restructuring, aimed to introduce elements of the market economy into the Soviet system. It was a radical departure from the command economy that had been in place since the early days of the USSR. However, these reforms did not go as planned. Instead of stabilizing the economy, they led to increased chaos. Why, you might ask? Well, the introduction of market mechanisms into an economy that had been strictly controlled for decades led to confusion and uncertainty. Enterprises that were used to receiving orders from above were now expected to compete in the market, but they lacked the necessary skills and experience. The result was a period of economic instability, characterized by falling output, rising prices, and widespread corruption. Moreover, the reforms were not comprehensive enough to bring about real change. The state still controlled key sectors of the economy, and the absence of a legal framework to support a market economy led to the rise of a shadow economy and organized crime. As the 1990s approached, the Soviet economy was on the brink. Hyperinflation had set in, goods were in short supply, and the infrastructure was crumbling. The Soviet Union, once a global superpower, was on the verge of economic collapse. And this, in many ways, set the stage for the political changes that were to come. The economy was on the verge of collapse, leading to hyperinflation, shortages, and crumbling infrastructure. Political reform and nationalism, two forces that inadvertently accelerated the collapse. As the Soviet Union grappled with economic challenges, a parallel narrative was taking shape in the realm of politics. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, launched political reforms that, while well-intentioned, had far-reaching consequences. In a bid to modernize the Soviet Union and foster a more open society, Gorbachev introduced a policy known as glasnost, or openness. This policy lifted censorship and encouraged public discussion about the country's problems. It was a radical departure from the policies of previous Soviet leaders who had maintained a tight grip on information and stifled dissent. However, this newfound openness had an unintended side effect. It sparked nationalist movements and demands for independence among the various republics that made up the Soviet Union. In the past, these aspirations had been suppressed. Now they were given a platform and a voice, and they grew louder and more insistent. The Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were among the first to take advantage of the political changes. They declared independence, setting a precedent that other Soviet republics soon followed. The domino effect was in full swing, and the Soviet Union was unable to stop it. It wasn't just the republics that were pushing for change. Many Soviet citizens, having tasted political freedom and openness, were no longer willing to accept the status quo. They demanded more rights, more freedoms, and more autonomy. The calls for change were not limited to the political sphere. They extended to every aspect of Soviet society, from the economy to the arts. In the end, the political reforms that were meant to strengthen the Soviet Union ended up weakening it. The surge of nationalism, coupled with the political changes, began to unravel the tightly knit fabric of the Soviet Union. And once the unraveling started, it was impossible to stop. The Soviet Union was on a path to dissolution, and there was no turning back. In 1991, a failed coup attempt marked the beginning of the end. As the Soviet Union tottered on the brink of collapse, a group of hardline Communist Party officials, fearful of losing power, hatched a plot to oust Mikhail Gorbachev. Their plan, however, was doomed to fail. The public, once silenced by fear, now rallied behind their leader, Boris Yeltsin, who boldly stood against the coup. The attempt not only failed, but also accelerated the disintegration of the political structure. It was a clear sign that the old ways of command and control were crumbling. The coup was a desperate gasp for air from a dying regime, a final attempt to cling to a power that had already slipped away. But it was too late. The seeds of change had been sown, and they were growing into a force that could not be stopped. The people had tasted freedom, and they were not willing to give it up. As the political structure crumbled, so did the economy. Hyperinflation soared, goods became scarce, and infrastructure fell into disrepair. The once mighty Soviet economy was collapsing under its own weight. In the midst of this chaos, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus made a historic decision. On December 26, 1991, they formally dissolved the Soviet Union and declared the formation of the Commonwealth of Independent States. It was a momentous day, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The Soviet Union, a superpower that had once commanded the world stage, was no more. It dissolved into 15 independent republics: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Each embarked on its own path, charting a course for a future that was no longer tied to the Soviet yoke. The once mighty Soviet Union was no more, leaving behind 15 independent republics and a world forever changed. The fall of the USSR had profound global implications, signaling the end of the Cold War and the emergence of the United States as the sole superpower. It was the final blow that brought down a giant, reshaping the world as we know it today.